There are two ways to approach another person. One can look for the differences, or one can look for our common humanity, the similarities. Lately, there seems to be a concentration on looking for differences and then scolding those who see them. And some seem to think that the woke folk are the first to discover or care about discrimination and prejudice. 50 years ago, I hung a poster on the stairway at my home showing two small children, a little boy and a girl, in an embrace. One was white, one was black. The cut line? The blind are also colorblind. I don't know who published it or where I got it, but I still like it. And our children grew up with that philosophy and lived by it, and judging by their friends and partners, we were quite successful. So do not think this is the first generation to want to make people blind to differences and open to embracing all. Prejudices do still exist. People still act horribly to others for irrational reasons. Simple questions still need to be answered by each of us as we attempt to eradicate this stain on our souls. What difference does the color of a person's skin make? Why do we care what god another worships, or if they worship a god at all? Why should we care who another person chooses to love, or with whom they share their bed, or the party they belong to, or who they voted for? Other than the complicating communication, what difference does it make what language they speak, or the country they come from? Does it really matter whether their ancestors crossed the Bering Land Bridge many thousands of years ago, or crossed the Atlantic in a sailing ship, or disembarked at Pearson yesterday? What has any of that to do with accepting each other and tolerating or celebrating our differences? This is not to say that nothing matters. Character matters. Values matter. A commitment to equality of opportunity for all matters. A commitment to observing our laws matters. A respect for the rights and responsibilities for each of us, that matters. To honor the best each person has to offer, and to discard the putrid in our own lives, that is what matters. What can make all this possible is a willingness to listen as well as talk, a genuine desire to sit down and get to know others better, a commitment to respecting those with whom we differ, and getting to understand their opinions, and not to shout others down or cancel or ghost them. That's what matters. Surely all else is superfluous. When I was growing up, the greatest prejudice in Canada that I knew of was between Roman Catholics and Protestants, between French Canadians and English-speaking Canadians. Because for the first 100 years of our country, there wasn't much interaction between different cultures and faiths. People knew and married people like themselves and raised their children with the same values with which they were raised. And we see the pattern repeated among immigrant communities today in places like Brampton and Scarborough. We have Little India, Greektown, various Chinatowns, and the Eastern Europeans of Roncesvalles. It's only reasonable that when Canadians settle together, it is easier to continue their language, religion, and cultural norms and remain in their comfort zone, more able to resist new ways of doing things and able to expose their children to the ways of the old country, just as the French and the British did when they first settled here. With the end of the Second World War, immigration patterns and policies changed with the camps of refugees needing resettling. New peoples brought new experiences and history. Canada and the whole world was changing, and how and what the impact would be was as yet unknown. Objectives change over time, and the interpretation of what those values means changes. And the times and context determine beliefs. We may believe in war as appropriate to defeat Hitler's Germany, but we stand in opposition to war in general. The post-war goal of a house in the suburbs, a wife in an apron, and husband off working gave us the great baby boom. And the ideal lasted for a while, but the women who had held men's jobs in the war years wanted back in the workforce and in the boardroom, not just the kitchen. And the 60s produced children willing to challenge both authority and the values of their parents and government. Times changed, as they always do. Once upon a time, democracy was seen as white men having the vote because they were the landholders and taxpayers. Then, Men of all nationalities and colors were included. And finally, women got the vote. Well, now even the imprisoned murderers and rapists are included on the voters list, getting to decide who will make the laws. So our interpretation over the meaning of universal suffrage changed, and now we quibble over what age one is responsible enough to vote. But no one would suggest that any of the included groups be eliminated. Times change, and so should we. Values change, but there are values that we held and still hold that seem so basic that we do not appreciate how unique they are to many other lands. Take education, for example. Initially, education was expected for those who would govern and those who would preach. Education was seen as largely wasted on others. Early on, Canada, with a significant Scottish influence, championed the notion of education for all, even girls. Today, we debate the value of government funding of religious or private schools, the rights of parents to choose to educate at home or to exclude their children from some subjects, such as sex ed, or insist on religious accommodation for their own worship during the school day. And we listen as they bewail the indoctrination of their children into the dangerous secular world. But we do not question the value of an educated and literate populace. However, as we face the unspeakably tragic failure of forcing residential schooling into the lives of the Indigenous of Canada, we know we have to do better, and that we must learn and atone and mourn. And somehow we still must come up with solutions that raises the levels of scholastic success for the children and families of those lands today. The tiny graves at Maryvale and Kamloops Indian residential schools, and undoubtedly more to come, must serve as a stark reminder that government policies, no matter the intent, can have horrendous consequences and outcomes. You know, the world is not divided between the good and the bad. There's only been one who was all good, and very few have been all bad. People reflect every variety of gray, so let none of us preen about how pure we are, because we aren't. Instead, we live in a world that needs to encompass everyone and their passions and dreams, the human family in all its variations, joys, and foibles, in all its glory. When I recently completed the census, I had to smile at the category white, while Asians had 5 categories. In my youth, white was Northern European and parts of Russia. Southern Europeans were definitely not white. But if you were going to include all the gray and pink and tan of Europe, then it was Caucasians that you were talking about, and thus parts of the Indian subcontinent were included. But when was the last time Caucasian was heard? And white seems so lame, and a buzzword for the guilty these days. Whatever done, no matter how good or successful, the judgment is that the very whiteness of the authors tainted all outcomes with colonialism, paternalism, and prejudice. Now, I do know the old saying, the pathway to hell is paved with good intentions. And surely bad intentions would also take you there. But good intentions acted on and delivered to the best of one's ability must be headed in the right direction. Which is not to say that good intentions are enough. Mistakes are made with the best of intentions, but far better to err trying to do good than do nothing and claim virtue. As long as your actions, based on your intentions, are for a better world, a better life, equality of opportunity for all, you cannot go far wrong. The woke folks' interpretation of historical characters notwithstanding. We create a climate in which all may flourish, but in setting that criteria, we must avoid abandoning values that produce positive change, even when our interpretation of change and objectives are not static over time. Normally, June is just the best of months, but this year it's been darkened by tiny graves, revealing a sordid past and a madman destroying a family. And for that the nation mourns, and an accounting is demanded. But June remains special. My great-granddaughter turned 6. The longest day of the year launched us into summer officially. Father's Day brought families together for barbecues. We celebrated officially both Pride and Indigenous cultures. And the final day marks our entry into Level 2 COVID freedoms, still constrained, but there's light at the end of the tunnel as more and more get their shots. And the climax comes as we leave June to set off the fireworks and listen to the speeches as we acknowledge the world's most diverse country with Canada Day. A land where the vast majority of our citizens daily rub shoulders with others from hundreds of different countries and cultures, hues and faiths, in harmony as we work together and live and love and care together. We mourn together and we celebrate together, for that is what neighbors do. We can all do better, and Canada still does better than most, but we are called to work harder at living together in harmony and respect, not separating into ever smaller bands of those with whom you share only the least important of similarities and the greatest number of prejudices. Remember, appreciating the worth of another does not mean you have to share everything. It does not mean you must delight in haggis or curry or Kobe beef. It does not mean you want to spend your evenings at either the Chinese opera or the symphony. And rap and bagpipes do not have to be found in your music collection. Whether you prefer a perm or dreadlocks or a shaven scalp is your choice. Just remember, others get to make their choices as well. How you live your life is your message to the world. It's up to each of us to make sure that it is inspiring. So may it be. Amen. The 7 sacred teachings show how Indigenous and Christians understand the world and life together. To cherish knowledge is to know wisdom. To know love is to know peace. To honor all of creation is to have respect. Bravery is to face the foe with integrity. Honesty also means righteousness. Be honest first with yourself in word and action. Humility is to know yourself as a sacred part of the creation. Truth is to know all of these things. May your lovely month of June continue to celebrate our commonalities, looking to a more equitable future, and so much more.